Where on earth are you? If you find that your Flutter app needs to know the geographic location of the device that it's running on, the location package is for you. The location package provides the location class, which can be used to obtain the current geographic location of the device, as well as listen for changes. But before you can get the location, you need to make sure the device's location service is enabled and that the user has given your app permission to access its location. Thankfully, location provides some methods to do this. First, you'll have to make sure the location service is enabled by checking Service Enabled. If it's not enabled, you can use Request Service to ask the user to enable it. Next, you'll have to ask for permission to get the device's location. Similar to the last step, you can check the current permissions using Has Permission and request access using Request Permission. Once you're in, it's just a matter of calling getLocation. The location data object contains lots of useful data about the device's location, including latitude and longitude, altitude, heading, and speed. You can use this data to display maps, calculate distances, and more. Additionally, you can listen for changes in the device's location using onLocationChanged. This lets you keep track of the location over time. Take a moment to think back to the last time you looked at a settings page. Wow, you probably said to yourself, I wish I could quickly and easily create a list of toggle switches like that. And you can. With Switch List Tile, you get a list tile that's tappable anywhere to switch a toggle from off to on. Switch List Tile's API looks a lot like widgets of similar names. List Tile, Checkbox List Tile, Radio List Tile, Switch List Tile all follow the same pattern. Start with the title text, which will appear in the middle of the tile. Then, you can add icons to either end, and with the control tiles, like Switch List Tile, you do this with the secondary property. You can also add a subtitle or flip which side the controls are on using control affinity. For List Tile, you can just swap the leading and trailing. Switch Tile and the other control tiles add the feature that the entire tile is tappable. But they don't just toggle all on their own. For that, Switch List Tile needs a value and an onChanged callback. This value is a form of state, so you'll typically find the switch list tile in a stateful widget so that onChanged can update it with setState. One thing that switch list tile has that the other controls don't, the ability to add an image to the control with active and inactive thumb image. Ever created a complex layout with multiple rows within a column? Wow, I wish there was an easier way to create a grid. Well, Grid View lets you do just that. While there are many grid view constructors, the most common way to create a grid view is using the count constructor. Start by listing all the items you want in the grid, but it doesn't end there. Control how many items you want across the grid by setting the cross-axis count property. Setting it to 1 makes it look like a normal list, but setting it to 4, now that's next level. What if your items want some social distancing? Main axis spacing gives horizontal space between the rows, and cross-axis spacing provides vertical space between the columns. And the best part about it is, just like a list view, you can scroll through your items. Don't forget to check Grid View's other constructors, like the Builder, Custom, and Extend constructors. Screens are often smaller than what you want to show on them. A big table or a detailed picture just won't fit on a phone screen in all their glory. That's why Flutter provides the Interactive Viewer widget. Just take your big, beautiful widget and wrap it with Interactive Viewer. And voila, the user can now zoom in and out of the widget and pan around. By default, Interactive Viewer will constrain the size of its child, making it squeeze inside. But by setting the constrained argument to false, you can let the inner widget size itself, even if that means some part of it will not be visible at first. There are other ways to customize your interactive viewer. Limiting movement, adding margins, registering callbacks. You can even provide your own controller to programmatically pan and zoom. So, next time your widget is bigger than the device, think about using the Interactive Viewer widget. Sliver App Bar may sound like a familiar widget, giving you the ability to have an app bar that grows and shrinks as you scroll a list up and down. But did you know there's been some recent additions? You can create a flexible area that expands to a given height using the expanded height and flexible space properties. But what happens to the Sliver App Bar when you reach the top of the list of slivers? To give an app bar room to stretch, set the stretch property to true. By default, the flexible spacebar will zoom its background, but you can override that with the stretch modes property. maybe by explicitly zooming the background, as well as blurring it out, or moving the title into the flexible spacebar and having it disappear with the stretch. And if you want to trigger other things to happen with the stretch, like refreshing the list contents, set an on-stretch trigger. Sometimes, your app needs to save important data on the device. If it's structured data, chances are you want to use a SQL database. And a SQL database engine that is available on almost any device, including mobile phones, is called SQLite. It's small and self-contained. It uses a single file to store your tables, and the code is public domain. Flutter developers have a variety of options for using SQLite. One of the most popular plugins is SQLite. In SQLite, you open a database file by calling open database. Almost everything in SQLite is asynchronous, so you'll have to await. You can also provide callbacks that create the database if it doesn't exist yet, or upgrade the database if it's using an old schema. SQLite lets you execute raw SQL on the database, and it helps you with escaping values so you don't accidentally corrupt your database. You can also use higher level functions, insert, update, delete to modify your database, and query to get data out of it. SQLite also supports transactions and batching, so your database operations can be safer and more efficient. Lastly, a couple of tips from the community. It's best to design your database and test your queries on your development machine, and only then copy your SQL to your project. If you use foreign keys, you can enable them in onConfigure when opening the database. Foreign keys are not on by default. Don't forget that SQLite is not your only local database option.